Hello and welcome to episode 17 of our Walk in My Shoes series, where we are looking at social entrepreneurship and exploring how philanthropy and social investment can be utilised to create innovation and how innovation can also catalyse philanthropic capital, particularly in times we are living in right now. My name is Sophie Sahanek and I am the Director of Training and Development at Philanthropy Impact and moderator of this series. Our chair for today is our board member Rennie Hoare, partner and head of philanthropy at C Hoare Co, and joining him on the panel is Matthew Bowcock, co-founder of the Beacon Collaborative, Chiu, managing director at the social investment Consultancy, and social entrepreneur John Loughton, founder and CEO of Dare to Lead and of Scran Academy. They will be exploring the benefits of innovation and the role and activities of professional advisors in supporting their clients to create change this way. This is a great subject, and I know that 30 minutes is going to fly by. But if you have questions or comments, please post them in the chat. We will do our best to get to them. If we can't, we'll take the conversation to LinkedIn. The link will be posted in the chat along with my email address if you need to get hold of me. I will now pass on to Rennie to make a start. Thank you, Rennie.
Thank you, Sophia. And I think a really interesting subject, and we have three extremely experienced and interesting speakers to hear from. Certainly when thinking about the space of philanthropy and the fusion with social entrepreneurship, it's an absolute necessity. There's some very embedded and certainly slightly antiquated practices inside philanthropy, and once looking at limited resources pre-COVID, you were thinking that things needs a bit of a shake-up. I think as we're getting into a position of even more stretched resources, hearing how things can be done in a different way that maybe increases and heightens impact is at one end extremely exciting, and probably at the other end an absolute requirement. To be able to do this safely and be able to do this with credibility, I think that clients need to have informed and educated advisors around them. A leap into the unknown by yourself is much harder than a leap into the unknown with someone that really knows what they're doing. And I think advisors can play a critical role in this. Before sort of breaking out and asking things to you, I certainly want to draw as much as possible out from the panel. And Matthew, in your role, both as a social entrepreneur and as a philanthropist, I think you've already done some exciting things, but what you're doing with the Beacon Collaborative and pushing forwards the ways of operating is certainly moving this space a long way forwards. And I'd like to explore that role of innovation and doing new things, because it looks like through your career that's something that you've always been trying to do.
Well, I think one of the problems with entrepreneurs, they have this terrible habit of always wanting to try and create something new, which is probably infuriating for the people around them. But some of you might have heard me say before that one of my observations is that entrepreneurs abhor a vacuum. If they see something that needs to be changed, they want to leap in and roll their sleeves up and do it. And of course, there are quite a number of people who are philanthropists who end up becoming incredibly engaged in the subject that they're backing, that they're supporting. They go about as far away as you can from being just a checkbook into a really engaged participant in it. So I think one of the interesting tensions sometimes is you end up with a donor who's an entrepreneur, and you end up with a social entrepreneur who's the recipient of the funds. And we might come back a little bit later to talk about how that partnership can work, but also the tension. But if I can just make one comment as well that might frame this a little bit, because we've got two words in the title, which are probably, people all have different impressions about what they mean. And so we can have a nice discussion from a semantic point of view about what we mean by philanthropy and what we mean by social entrepreneur. But certainly I see philanthropy as being a form of money which can take risks. I think it was Warren Buffett who said that philanthropy is society's risk capital. And so it should be taking risks and backing social entrepreneurship in a way that other forms of money can't, because all money has personality. It has characteristics and baggage it brings with it. Corporate money, government money, lottery money, charitable fundraising and retail fundraising money, trust and foundation money, they all have different characteristics. And philanthropic money brings a particular type of personality and characteristic, which if you can make it work well, can be incredibly powerful because it'll take risks. But you have to see it as a different form of money to other forms of income. And ideally, you have a really diverse income stream. Diversity is the key word at the moment, and diversity of income stream can be very powerful in terms of social entrepreneurs trying to achieve what they're doing.
John, as a social entrepreneur yourself, did you find that interaction with philanthropists, was it something that you're experiencing early on, or was that something that you had developed as a social entrepreneur, and then it was a whole new set of experiences and expertise that you had to learn?
Yeah, I think I'm still learning it, to be honest. I wouldn't say I've cracked it by any stretch of the imagination, or I feel that sometimes you use the word innovation, but even in the philanthropy world, there's still that element around it's all based on measuring risk. Sometimes people want to support projects when it's been so tested that it's probably not innovative anymore, and the system's kind of playing catch up. So the true innovative thinkers in philanthropy who get behind fresh ideas, in my experience, it often stems from really powerful relationships, and there's an emotional investment where there's trust, and there's some sort of values connection. So I agree with everything that was just said there by Matthew, but the thing I'd add into that is money absolutely has personality and characteristics, but often the tone of that characteristic of finance is often driven by the relationships between people. And I always try and make it as interpersonal as possible, not just have it transactional between agency or kind of supply chain, if you like. And I think that bit's a real opportunity where philanthropy can set themselves aside from local authority or IGO or kind of national government funding, which has often got a very tight specification. And some money is about not doing anything wrong. Other money is often about trying to find out what's right. And that bit for me is really exciting. And the element based around trust for me is really important. Coming off the back of COVID-19, and I've completely shape-shifted, pivoted seems to be the word we're all using again, and reformed. We have an apparatus that can apply itself. We're steeped in the community. We know the value of lived experience. We know the power of working with people, not just for them. Shown me those investors, supporters, philanthropists who've just got on board at a real time of crises and got behind me and got behind us, and others that are trying to play the slow burn. I've got very addicted as one of those fast, let's just get it done entrepreneurs to the fast money because we need to firefight. I want to provide goals, help more families, nurture more children, help more people who are shielded and isolating. But at the same time, we can't just, that old adage, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. What happens when, to philanthropy, is my offer needs to be, I need to go fast and far. So I need to be able to go with you, but also at times trust me to go alone. And finding that ability for us to be entrepreneurial within a pre-existing relationship with a philanthropist, for me is really important. And I think that's different in a way that I've never experienced before due to COVID-19. And that mix between responding but also building something. And I've moved away from trying to find best practice. My new language is who's ready to practice, and they get bought in to the mission, and less around measuring everything, but more about being part of that shared experience to how we make things happen when people need it.
And I think that element of trust absolutely huge, and certainly when I think about our grant making inside the Golden Bottle Trust, it is about finding individuals, CEOs that we can back, and we will actually give them unrestricted grant funding because we want to see how they're going to develop, and we don't want to second guess their business models. But I think COVID-19 has put an additional lens on things in terms of scarce resources trying to solve bigger problems. And Bonnie, I was wondering, it would just be interesting to hear from your perspective as to how innovation now needs to take hold in a way that probably hasn't been seen before inside this sector as a response to the virus.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm coming to this conversation partly as a social entrepreneur, also partly as a consultant to different philanthropists, charities. And I think I see kind of both sides of the equation, some of the tensions that Matthew spoke about. And for social entrepreneurs, there's no excuse not to innovate during these times, whether it's the operational constraints that are posed by COVID or the increasing demand from the people we're serving. We all need to adapt and innovate. And for social entrepreneurs, and there are different definitions, but for social entrepreneurs that are in my case, have an earned income model where we have relationship with customers. That's one set of challenges whereby if our customers are hit by the economic crisis, how do we adapt? But I think for social entrepreneurs that are still getting funding from philanthropists, I've seen a lot of them and my peers just not telling their funders what they're doing and just going ahead and shift, because in order to shift to tell your funder, going through the iteration, that just takes a lot of time, and a lot of the processes around philanthropy, such as having your KPI set at the beginning of the funding, having your budget set, and if your budget goes beyond 10% of what you have actually initially created, you then need to submit a new budget. I mean, all these unnecessary processes are actually getting in the way of innovation. And I think this is the time to actually recognize philanthropy and what are some of the barriers that we have unintentionally put up, and how can we go back to a more trust-based form like what you, John, was saying. And I think what Rennie, your foundation, unrestricted funding is a really great way to actually catalyze innovation, because social entrepreneurs simply, if you're really innovating, you simply don't know what you are going to do exactly. What you can do best is to respond to what your beneficiaries and what your users are telling you, and you have to adapt and pivot all the time. And I think the other thing that I'm seeing, which is a good thing, is the digital transformation that are slowly happening. A lot of the charity sector in particular have to embrace now digital transformation. And a lot of my clients, some are traditional charities, the likes that you hear, kind of on high street, they have been forced to adopt digital transformation. And from that, I actually see a lot of interesting things that are happening. I'm involved myself in a project using artificial intelligence in improving humanitarian aid delivery. So there's a lot of interesting conversations happening around that, and a lot of interesting use cases. But again, within that project, I don't find a lot of philanthropists that I can talk to, because I think philanthropists tend to assume, and I'm willing to be challenged by that, by Matthew and your point, but I feel philanthropists tend to feel that you need to understand everything in order to first make your investment or your donation. But with this ever-changing world, I think we need to be comfortable with the unknowns and just really trusting the people we invest in to understand what they will do. And if it's a new area like artificial intelligence, maybe if the philanthropist won't be the expert, but they can trust in someone else being the expert and delivering the impact.
And that's a fascinating development on things. And Matthew, from the successful philanthropists that you've seen and using your own practice, how do you go into these highly impactful areas where there's a small amount of evidence, but there's a high amount of impact and social good that can be done by something? And how do you get confident in doing funding of that nature?
I mean, to pick up on what John was saying, it's interesting. We've all used the word trust, trust is absolutely fundamental to this, but it doesn't come overnight. You know, our research has found that often people will give a £1,000 donation in order to find out how the charity treats them. And there's research that says that the third donation is often the biggest one, because that's a reflection of how you've built up the level of trust and confidence in the relationship. And you're prepared to repurpose and take risks, because and people will also become less and less project specific and more generic, unrestricted core funding as they build up that level of trust. The way I look at this a little bit is that, in a sense, you know, philanthropy is about where you have the desire and the means to be able to make change happen, but you don't necessarily have the capability. The social entrepreneur often has the same desire to make change happen, and they have the capability to do it, but they don't necessarily have the means. So if you put those two together, in theory, you should have a marriage made in heaven. You should have a partnership that works really well. But it takes time for that trust to build up and for it to become a partnership of equals, not a transactional relationship, but one where they're both participating in helping to solve the problem. And I think often social entrepreneurs underestimate the level of skill and contacts and networks and relationships that a partner donor can bring to them. Let me give you a really simple example. I recently came across a situation where they were trying to raise money for a particular cause. They'd found somebody who was willing to give. And then when the donor said, well, will that achieve your target? And they said, no, it won't. We need another 30K. So they said, okay, let me make some phone calls. But they never thought of asking that donor to help to fundraise for them. So sometimes actually inviting them in as a partner, because if I'm really honest, very often philanthropists actually feel as if they're treated like checkbooks. So that trust relationship is reciprocal and is built up over a period of time. So it's very difficult to do at day one. And in terms of the current COVID situation, I've seen situations where charities have gone back to donors and said, you know, you gave us this money for this particular project. Please, can we repurpose it because we desperately need it for this purpose? And virtually every one of them has said yes, interestingly. So again, it's inviting them in as shareholders to help us solve the problem on the basis of trust.
And with that,
I find that fascinating. Yeah, just
no, go for it, John.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And often, in a lot of the work I do with some leadership coaching with other social entrepreneurs, is it's something we've all heard, but rule one in getting something is knowing that you can ask for it. And you hear that from Matthew around, actually, people who are giving almost want to be brought in. Help. It's almost a form of guidance or support, although it feels like sometimes there's a pecking order because money is such a holy grail conversation in the third sector or the startup world or whatever you're operating. Some big, nations or finance firms and other places where I've received money previously, I went and said, rather than saying, oh, please, can I use that money for something else this year? Just even framing it around, can we have a conversation about doing something quite spicy and quite exciting together? There's a real opportunity here to see where this goes. And sometimes they enjoy that question around, can you help me prove that this might not work? And in itself, there's so much value in falsifying the right track because it means I'm going to be better the next time around. But maybe it's tonality. I'd be interested to hear is there something more the kind of professionalized philanthropy world can do to almost encourage social entrepreneurs to feel their own parity of esteem in that relationship, that they're able to ask for help, go beyond the paradigms of the kind of grant conditions letter and say, is it okay for me to tell you I'm confused or struggling, I don't know this bit, or you could help me match fund or something. I wonder what we can do to cultivate that kind of relationship a bit more at the outset where that trust can get going a bit quicker.
If I can jump in here from a perspective of kind of measuring impact, which I think is often, considering the relationship between philanthropists and social entrepreneurs often have to give evidence to show what they're doing is actually creating impact. And I'm often in the middle of that relationship. Either a philanthropist commissions me to help measure impact of their portfolio, or I get commissioned by a social entrepreneur or a charity to demonstrate the impact. What I feel COVID has actually done for us is that we are better at telling other people that we might not have this figured out. We're more open to sharing our failures and our learnings, because previously, whenever I'm in those relationships with measuring impact, the truth is creating change in people's lives is very difficult, and something's bound to not have worked as you expected. And oftentimes as a researcher, I find that something is not worked as we intended. Sometimes negative impact, unintended negative impact, but almost never can I actually share that with my clients. So I would tell them, but they will remove it from their reports, which I understand why they wouldn't want that. And very seldom am I actually in a room with the philanthropist and the social entrepreneur to actually talk about the impact evidence. And just one breakthrough recently, because I think my client, a philanthropist, has actually realized that with COVID, things are so difficult and things change. And I was able to have an opening in the discussion to help her understand that if the evidence that you're getting is all good, something is not working, and you have to interrogate why have we not heard any bad news, because human lives are complex. So hopefully in the very least we can just be asking those questions, because innovation is really about try and error. So unless we have this culture of positive error, we cannot progress to where philanthropy is actually supporting innovations.
And I think that sharing of failure is probably an endemic failing across the philanthropy sector. I know that for us, one of the situations where we can get it is in small little lunches or dinners where we get donors together to discuss on a philanthropist to philanthropist basis. But beyond that, I think that people find it deeply uncomfortable discussing the things that don't go right, and that completely runs contrary to the way that you need to be able to be an entrepreneur. Certainly if you're thinking about the fusion of doing something and doing it in a digital way, not discussing things that are going wrong means that you can't be working nearly in the optimized way that you need to. Now I see that we've got some questions coming in. So this is from Derek. It's a post-crisis. Do you see the emergence of new types of public-private partnerships to address dynamic health, climate, or other risks? And where can philanthropy play the catalytic role in that? I think philanthropy must be able to play a hugely catalytic role in that. But does anyone want to jump in on what those new types of partnerships could look like?
I mean, I'll make a comment if you like, Rennie. I think we have got into a little bit of a narrow way of thinking where things are either private or public, and then rarely the two are in step. Now, they are dramatically different types of money, and I've had very bad experience of trying to manage, when I was chairing UK community foundations, of trying to manage a government matching grant program in which the complete mismatch between the way philanthropists approach a matching program and the way civil servants approached it with the accountability requirements of government were, just like two ships passing in the night. I mean, it was quite extraordinary how different the philosophies were. So it's not easy pulling together, private money and public money into lockstep in a way that works well. That's not to say it shouldn't be done, but you have to recognize that you're working with very different types of money and different types of behavior. So I think there will be a lot more opportunity to create the climate in which change happens, but it won't necessarily be by being in lockstep. There can be government matching programs, for example, which can be very powerful and very successful. But I think it's more important that we see investment in a shared way in things like the infrastructure, the framework, the use of data, greater transparency across the sector. I mean, frankly, the sector is pretty antediluvial in its use of technology at the moment. And professional advisors would say they have no idea where to look to advise clients when they start getting to looking at particular causes. So creating the framework within which we can all work much more efficiently and much better is an area in which we really can collaborate. but it's not easy sometimes putting the money right alongside each other because they often mismatch in their expectations.
And so the philanthropic capital might have to come before, but at least there's that continuity of discussion and development.
Well, if you've ever seen this Nestor spiral of innovation, sorry, just to pick up on that, that identifies, and it's worth looking at, a number of people use this spiral of innovation. And philanthropic money very often funds the very early stage money when they say, this is unproven, untested, but I'll back you to try it. And then it scales up to a certain point. But then government that looks to see evidence to be able to scale innovation to a national level only comes down to a certain point. And there's this great chasm of evidence between the point at which philanthropic money can go and the point to which government money and lottery money comes down, and therefore innovation rarely gets taken up. So one area in which I'd love to see us collaborate a lot more is filling that chasm, so government comes further down in its risk-taking, and philanthropists and trusts and foundations are willing to back further up the scale up of proven innovations, so that we complete that spiral and we don't end up with a gap in it.
I think that sounds certainly something big to aim towards if we're going to be operating in an environment of scarce resources, that we need to make sure that we're not developing things to a certain point and then they're dropping off from truly being scaled.
Exactly.
Oh, and Ian Frith made a very good comment that quite a lot of it is paring it back. What it sounds like is paring it back to the very basics of things, of getting a trusted advisor alongside you, really understanding your capabilities, and then being able to search for those social entrepreneurs that as a philanthropist you can work with. And I think that's certainly something to bear in mind, that even though we're talking about doing things that are new, risk-taking, catalytic, actually quite a lot of the tools that we can use are the real basics of trust, understanding people, and taking understood and considered risks.
And I think one reflection I have as a social entrepreneur is also that the partnership with philanthropists, apart from all the value added you could provide beyond money, is actually that joint ownership of the problem and the passion for the problem that we're solving together. And a social entrepreneur might come up with an idea on how to solve that, but they might not, but things might not work as intended. But I think if we can facilitate this partnership where we jointly own the problem, and for the philanthropist to actually trust the entrepreneur's curiosity beyond its own kind of solution that it's come up with, that will be a much more lasting relationship. And I think that's something we really need during COVID, because all the assumptions we have now on how the world works are fundamentally out of the door. So we need kind of this focus really on the problem rather than necessarily the solution that the funding has been prescribed for.
Can I cut in, Renee, or do you want?
No, I see you're looming onto our screen. I will let you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have 1 minute left. So Bonnie, John, Renee, and Matthew, thank you. This is a good start to a much needed conversation, and we'll do more on this topic. Maybe we could end by having a 30-second words of wisdom from each of you, and perhaps we could start with John.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure. I guess the thing around redefining the paradigms of how we all work together in philanthropy post-COVID, I think a lot of it was already there beforehand. I think we could talk about trust, measuring the right things, all that stuff's there, but there is some, from my point of view, that I think big, serious philanthropists have a bit of a shared duty to help inspire those people you back and support, those startups, those charities, those social entrepreneurs, particularly as the line between a charity and a social enterprise merge as we get more trading-based charities. You have a real opportunity to help them lift their head from the keyboard when they're churning out reports to evidence how great they are. Not because they're short-sighted, but because they're damn busy. And I think going forward, there's a real excitement to help them think more innovative in itself around the types of way they can be useful, whether that's advocacy or match funding or having a joint approach. If I've got a philanthropist in my back pocket, often a government will listen to me a lot quicker, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. Matthew.
Fundamentally, it's about building that trust, taking risk, building trust, sharing the problems, and turning that into a partnership and a collaboration. And that's fundamentally how the relationship should work. We didn't get onto how it doesn't, but I think there's been a lot of head nodding between all of us about those words of sharing the problem, collaboration, building trust, taking risk.
Thank you very much. Bonnie.
I learned over the weekend, I have a book recommendation, The Purpose of Capital, that I'm reading by Jed Emerson. And he quoted that wisdom only comes from paradox. So I think part of us today exploring what those paradoxes are, the tensions that arise in this journey would be us getting closer to wisdom. And the other book that you highlighted in the speaker's notes, but we didn't get to, is The Entrepreneurial Attitude. I just have it with me, but it's about stories of a lot of entrepreneurs. I was honored to be featured in there, and it talks about the ingredients of being an entrepreneur. I think all of us need to be entrepreneurial, whether we start an enterprise or not, and hopefully those words of wisdom, not from me, but from people I've learned from, would also carry us forward in our journey of discovery.
Thank you very much. Renee, the last word of wisdom from you.
I think the final thing is probably the open discussions that are needed and people having the confidence to share failures. Certainly something that has been a common theme through here is that if we want to develop at the speed that we're required to, the sharing of failures, we're going to have to get much, much better at doing it.
So good, and learning from the failures as well, and moving on. Sophia, final closing for you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for joining us today, and to our panelists and speakers today. That was really interesting. I also want to bring this probably to a bigger event later, because there is so much more to talk about. Before the audience signs off, I just wanted to highlight that tomorrow we have our first interactive virtual event discussing the role of philanthropy and social investment in the recovery from COVID-19. It's a follow-on from episode 12 of I'll Walk in My Shoes, which you can find on YouTube. And we'll be asking you, the audience, to lead the discussion. We posted the registration link in the chat. Please do send through questions and comments for what you would like us to cover. I'm really excited by it, and I'm really looking forward to it. So come and join us. Thank you, everybody, again.